Marilee Foster, a farmer, next on Environment Long Island. Welcome to Environment Long Island. I'm Carl Grossman, and with me is Marilee Foster, and she's from a family of farmers, and she too is a devoted, a dedicated farmer, and also an author. Dirt Under My Nails, An American Farmer and Her Changing Land. Welcome, Marilee.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, I'm going to start off the program by talking about your parents. Cliff and Lee Foster. Cliff has passed away. Your mother's thankfully still around. But I remember, this is decades ago, as a reporter, I was covering your parents committed to the preservation of farming on Long Island. Now, you guys own hundreds of acres in Sagaponack. I mean, I've flown over your farm actually in a helicopter, and there it is, this fertile, green, beautiful land, and then there's the ocean. Mm-hmm. I mean, you don't see that even. Fertile green land in Iowa is one thing, but here, juxtaposed to the, I mean, your father and mother could have ended up with hundreds of millions of dollars if they sold out and allowed mega mansions to sprout on the Foster farmland in Sagaponack. Why didn't they?
I think they wanted potatoes, and I think, but I think that because my father it had been several generations in his family, I think he identified it as an honest day's work, and he, through example, I think my brother and I developed a love for the lifestyle and the work, the ups and downs of it, and it just it seemed like the best way to use property without wreaking havoc. It's, as you said, very fertile, so you wouldn't want to trade that in for houses because our land can produce in almost, any kind of season. So it's valuable not just for us within the community, but honestly, food is our security. We don't do so well without it, and it's being part of that system that I think we appreciate and have. So there it is.
And one thing about that land too, I don't know if people realize that there are grades of soil, mm-hmm. Different levels of quality in terms of soil. Right. I think it's 32 grades. And thanks to the glacier and what it dumped here in the ocean, your land is, I mean, you got to go to, speaking of Iowa, you go to a place like Iowa and you see that kind of dark, mm-hmm. fertile soil, amazingly so. But here you don't need, along the ocean particularly, the kind of irrigation that you'd need in Iowa. I mean, it's like, it's made for farming.
Yeah. It's only, 15,000 years old, so it's also young land.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so Long Island itself, just all that glacial material scraped off of, I believe, mostly New England, took some of their nice stuff, dropped it here, but Sagaponack is almost entirely, at least what I consider Sagaponack, the southern part of the highway portion there, is almost entirely grade A agricultural soil. It has its own designation of Bridgehampton loam. Yeah. Parts of Bridgehampton are made up of that same soil. But you have these little microclimates within it, so or micro soil types anyway. So the bulk of it south of the highway is that very beautiful, it's potato land. And then when you go north of the highway, you get into some lighter, more like the North Fork of Long Island, which is Plymouth sand and Riverhead loam, I think.
Yeah, but the Bridgehampton loam,
that's the sweet stuff.
That's like at the top of the list.
That is. It's right up, and that's one of the reasons that I think they were able to start preserving land so early compared to, because the USDA, the federal government, even recognized the underlying value of this land. Yeah.
I mean, to use it for housing
Yeah.
is,
Not okay.
no, I mean, it's land, it's the kind of soil all over the world people prize.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of places, in Europe in
Yeah.
particular,
Yeah.
they don't allow housing on this
Right.
quality of soil.
Right. Right.
Let's talk about your initial connections with that land.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get interested in gardening perhaps,
Yeah.
or farming perhaps would be the appropriate term? Coercion?
No, just kidding. So I think that, sometimes you don't realize how much something is of you until you're away from it. So I did the regime of, went to a liberal arts school.
Beloit College,
yeah,
Wisconsin, right?
And I figured that I would take that liberal arts education and that would help me find my way. And it just so happened that I came back that last summer, after I graduated, not with plans to stay that long, but it was a very dry summer. And so I started just helping my brother full time deal with moving irrigation pipes. So we do have to irrigate, but luckily it's available. But there are times during the summer where we have to irrigate for a spell, sometimes. And so in being back working with him, did I realize he was working the farm with my father and other employees, but there was a lot to be done. And so I really just became enthusiastic about being part of that crew. And then for a year or two I worked with them, and then I started branching off and raising vegetables for a roadside stand that would help, kind of, even at that time we knew that the potato industry was going through some massive changes, and I was seeing the roadside stands come along and as being an alternative for that. So started developing my farm stand as part of our farm. And so, the two things still exist. The potato farm has gotten smaller. My roadside stand has gotten somewhat larger. We're building a distillery. So we're at the same time, we don't want to get rid of our sort of older, the institution of farming. The economics are really just of being here are forcing us to diversify and take on new pursuits.
Well, it's competition too. I mean,
Yeah.
all over Long Island, the potato was, in terms of
It was
agriculture,
everywhere.
it was the king.
Yeah.
But then Idaho
Mm-hmm.
jumped in and competed against
Mhm.
Long Island.
And the South, with the changing climate, and I don't know so much about, but more and more potatoes are being raised in the Carolinas. It could be tobacco coming out of use. It's like when something happens in the farming economy, it sometimes takes many years for it to ripple out, and all of a sudden you say, wow, there's no market for the Long Island round white. And again, the standardization of the Idaho potato and processing equipment, the way we eat, it's all different. So, yeah.
Now, you've spoken about the impact of NAFTA
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
in regards to potatoes in your
Right.
farm.
Yeah.
I don't think most people are aware of what
Right.
happened because of NAFTA.
Yeah, so NAFTA 1. I don't know what NAFTA 2. I don't know about NAFTA 2, but NAFTA 1 was, I was active in Farm Bureau at that point, and on our local, the Long Island chapter. And at that point, farmers in the Northeast knew it would be a game changer because it was going to open up markets to our Canadian competitors. So the greenhouse industry really changed. For us, it was Prince Edward Island, which I believe is like, I can't remember how much acreage they have in potatoes, but they're huge. So it just changed, reconfigured the marketplace for us. And so the price of potatoes went down, and honestly, it's never fully come back. You have a good year every now and then, but if last year was any example, we're selling potatoes for, not much more than we were selling them for in the 90s. And we all know where the, costs of doing business have gone since then. So it's just not working. And I mean, again, the marketplace has even shifted. We used to export most of our potatoes into the Caribbean. Now most of them are right into the New York area, which is kind of nice, that they're being consumed locally. But not nearly as many of them.
Yeah, Puerto Rico used to be a big
Right, we
market
used
for
to
your.
ship, and Puerto Rico, I believe, worked as a hub through the Caribbean. So, and now that marketplace again, ports have changed the way that ports are run. You know, it's so much bigger than you're out there doing the best you can as a farmer. But when you're dealing with something in that quantity, it's so much bigger than how hard you work. It's trade agreements, it's shipping agreements, it's, you know, our environment changing. So, yeah, there's been a lot of changes that have happened in my short, whatever, however many years I am.
To make it in agriculture,
Yeah.
but particularly on the North Fork.
South or north.
Oh, no, we're speaking on the
okay.
North Fork where all the vineyards are. I
Right.
mean, there's some vineyards here
Right.
on the South Fork, but when the potato market tanked, in effect,
Yeah.
a lot of those folks went to wine.
Yes.
Now, we'll talk about this distillery and
Yeah.
the direction you took
Right.
to vodka.
Right.
Why didn't you choose wine? Why did you go to vodka?
Right. So the South Fork, speaking of microclimates, is actually just that much more humid and challenging. We're not grape farmers. It's a whole different skill set. So we didn't want to give up potato farming. We'd always kind of joked about one day maybe. So when it became law, and I think it was 2012, it was basically the law that made it possible to have a farm winery. Made it possible. They expanded it to include a farm distillery, farm breweries.
State law this was.
Yeah, this is a state law, Cuomo.
Right.
I think it's 2012. And after substantial lobbying from, you know, because these farms were seeing it happen for wineries, and not everybody wants to raise grapes. Grapes are hard. So we took that as our, you know, our checkered flag, and really started working almost immediately to build our distillery. Because we're so heavily invested in the potato industry, we didn't want to have to throw out all our equipment and start with something new. So let's at least, you know, start with something we know. And our cousin was working in he was a beer maker at a large place out in Utah. Whoops, he moved back here and became our distiller after, you know, taking extensive classes and working at a few other distilleries. So it was sort of, that was a nice feel that was still family oriented. But the idea was that we would just keep farming potatoes as we developed this distillery.
I see.
Yeah.
So it was the potato vodka, because vodka is made in Russia. It's
just about anything.
Yeah, well, they have wheat, I think,
Yeah.
they use in Russia. I've been to Russia a bunch of times, and I mean, it's amazing the kinds of. In fact, you're moving into that zone. You go to. In the airport, they'll have like a liquor shop.
Right.
And in Moscow, they'll have at the airport all kind of vodka with all kind of different cherry vodka and grape vodka, and you're doing kind of like that too.
Well, so vodka, we're trying to, terroir gets talked a lot in grapes. People talk about the terroir, the land it's coming from, and how that's imparted. And because going back to that Bridgehampton loan, we personally feel if you're just going to eat a potato, a Long Island potato, alongside a potato from another region, it's going to be different. And we think it's going to be better, right? So we want to take that, our really, you know, meaty potatoes, our flavorful, moist, delicious potatoes, and we want to convert that into a more aromatic vodka, a vodka that evokes and captures some of where you are, as opposed to vodkas traditionally. I don't know why this is, you know, rubbing alcohol. It's a neutral spirit. And we think when we started working with our test batches of vodkas, you know, you get these notes of vanilla and a little anise, and it's got a little bit more going on. But then to sort of scale it, we also using our own wheat. We made a wheat vodka.
Oh.
And you can compare them side by side and sort of say, well, this is potatoes and this is wheat. And then, but as far as actual flavoring the vodkas go, we'll probably we want to make like a cucumber vodka, but nothing too heavy-handed. We want the earth to be able to speak to you.
A rhubarb vodka you developed.
We've got a rhubarb liqueur.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, we just won an award with it.
Oh, really? Congratulations.
Yeah, so that'll be our family, you know, our family crest will have to be part of our liqueur line. But so that's really, you know, rhubarb is, you know, again, that's something that does really well in southern Sagaponack. It likes that moist soil, that slightly cooler environment. So yeah, it's pretty neat tasting. It's delicious.
With the plans for the I mean, how big are you going to get with it? Like
So there's a cap.
Okay.
So yeah, in order for anything to happen, right, there's got to be a limitation. So I don't know the exact, but it's something like it's quite a bit. It's more than we could really make, but you are limited as to how much you can produce in the proof gallons, and how much you can sell as a farm distillery. We have our own classification as a farm distillery, and so with that, a variety of rules will limit what we can do, and also give you a certain amount of freedom. But it's all very, it's very regulated by both. Well, we have our municipal government, but then the state and the federal, obviously, it's a controlled substance, so you have a lot of bookkeeping.
And the trade name is Saga?
So it's Sagaponack Farm Distillery,
Right.
which we just kept it purely what it is.
Right.
And then we named our vodka Sagaponica, just kind of a kick on the vodka sound. And then we have the rhubarb liqueur, but again, just keeping it what it is, rhubarb liqueur. And some of these things will only be available in our tasting room because we'll be making them in truly small batches. The vodka we can make just because of the production, it's a little bit quicker, and we can make that for the wholesale. But certain things will probably only move out of our tasting rooms.
And on the North Fork, or actually the Lens Vineyard here, do they have, in effect, tours? Or
Right.
Are you going to do
Right.
that kind of thing?
So we joke, these things seem, I just came back from a distillery convention, and these seems, part and parcel. You go to Kentucky, you go on the Bourbon Trail. You're touring one distillery after the other, being welcomed into their process and their barrel cellars. We, again, will have limitations as being a farm distillery. And because, we're farmers, we want to welcome people onto our farm. We won't be taking people through the distillery proper, just because of the prohibitions of what it means to have a distilled spirits plant. Also, it's a lot. It's a lot to operate and to run, and it's very science process oriented, and you don't really want the disturbance of. But we want to use this to be able to welcome people onto our farm, for people to understand where these potatoes come from. We joke about the word distill, which is, to bring everything down, to take a lot and bring it down to almost its essence. And that's a little bit of what we're left with, this little patch in Sagaponack, but yeah.
You have how many acres in Sagaponack?
We're currently farming, I believe, just over 300. Some of that is rented. A lot of that is some of preserved land, other farms that have preserved land, ag reserves. We do some projects with people who have bought farmland, but they themselves are not farmers, so we'll do everything from, custom wildflowers or whatever they might want. Some people actually want vegetables on their farms, and so do, some seeding for them, and it's kind of a mix. But we have about close to 300 acres in commercial production, potatoes, grains. We still do a little corn, and all of that will end up in a bottle at one time or another.
Now, just for people who aren't familiar with where the farm is located, just explain how you get to it.
Right, so our home farm it used to be exactly a mile from the ocean. We have a milestone, but it's now closer to maybe 9/10 of a mile from the ocean. It's coming. And so it's really southern. It's right in the middle of Sagaponack almost now, just a little bit south of what was the general store. I can look out and see the cemetery where ancestors have been interred, and but pretty central, just about 2 inches above sea level. Not much to give there.
I hope climate change and the rising seas are,
I think, those things will already impact us, but I think if last fall was any example of what it might mean to live in a changing climate, it's worrisome. It's very hard to grow. Potatoes, for example, are a long season crop. You plant them in April, you might still be harvesting in October. And whereas you can go in with lettuce and radish, you can be in and out in 40 days. So when you've got to extend to your 120 days and experience every weather system in those several months, it's challenging. You're going to experience freezing and droughts and unbelievable rainfall, which maybe I was calmer when I was, fresh out of college, but it didn't seem so extreme. It didn't seem so extreme. It seemed a little bit more regulated. Our weather, it just seems like anything can get thrown at you, and yeah.
And you're so dependent on
You're so dependent.
on dry. I mean,
Yeah.
and there's the ocean, and the forecast
Yeah.
in coming decades
Yeah.
rise a couple of
Yeah.
inches, a couple of inches. And
Yeah. Luckily, not luckily, but we all rely on food, so it's actually going to impact all of us, though. Our pond, for example, Sag Pond, which sort of, snakes through the edge of our farmland, those lower ends of the field, we plant grassways there now. We say, well, we don't really want it because it gets so wet. And you're trying to mitigate for what may or may not happen, but just because of the cost of farming and stuff, you begin to take the safe path. I think there was a time where farmers were saying, well, I'm going to risk it. No, that's
generations ago, I think it was 6 generations ago, the
Yeah.
Fosters started farming on Long Island in Nassau County, right?
Yeah.
And then you moved, like so many other people, including me, east
Yeah.
and east, and you ended up, the family ended up in
Inside.
Sagaponack. How do you see the future? I mean, sometimes I think, because I originally grew up in Brooklyn, and
Right.
we moved to Queens, and
Right.
my wife and I lived in Hempstead, and then we moved to Sayville, and
Right.
I mean, the next stop is Block Island.
Right.
I mean,
I think they have a smidgen of Bridgehampton Loam out there. They got a little stubbed off. So the future, I mean, that's a great question. I think the farming dynamic has changed out here. You have you have several smaller, more diversified farms. You have people, first-generation farmers. That's exciting to see, and it's also something we thought impossible. If there hadn't been the land preservation aspects that that have happened here, it would have been impossible for some of these young people to begin their farms. And I think it also, again, offers back to the people that do populate this area for at least part of the year, sort of a really grounding experience of how good it is and how amazing our soils are and what we can offer. It's hard to know what the future will be. There's a lot of headwinds in agriculture. Our farm in particular, for a variety of reasons, there's not a next generation. So we have a different set of plans as to, how our farm will continue in existence beyond us, because nowhere in our plan is development. So we want to continue to develop the farming asset of our farm. And, but there's not going to be at the end of the line a free-for-all. We won't be converting our land. Unless, of course, there's always things that happen, but that's not our plan. So my parents worked probably at least 40 years of their life planning for the eventual transition of generations. And now, some of the things that they put into play are the same tools that my brother, my sister, and I are working with to keep that land in farming.
oh, they were so committed. And I remember your father and mother going to the Suffolk County legislature
Yeah.
and otherwise
Yeah.
being involved in saving. I mean, Suffolk County in their day was the number one agricultural county in New York State.
Yeah.
It's not number one, and a couple of years ago it was kind of pushed out of that position. But I
We're
think
going to bring it back.
well,
Gotta
you
get it
should.
back there.
But it's still high.
Yeah.
It's still, I
It's
think.
staggering. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of food comes off this property, and then you also have the ornament, like the horticultural industry, in general, landscaping. But now you've got guys raising hops on the North Fork. You've, again, like the more diversified and in some cases more valuable product. We raise tons and tons of potatoes, but now people are, the hops, that's a very specialized. And so hopefully those industries will embrace what's available.
Now, you not only are committed to farming, but you write it.
Yeah.
Not just that book, which is still available, I think, certainly as a used copy.
Yeah.
But you write a column in the Eastern edition of the Southampton Press. In fact, it's right under my column in the Eastern edition of the Southampton Press. You must, and that's weekly. I mean, you got to knock that thing. Like, I got to knock out my column every week.
It's a nail biter.
Well, it's more like a tap dance. I kind of feel to do a column every week. how do you manage, like particularly in the middle of the
Right.
summer,
It
to do that
gets-
column?
Yeah. I think I try to write, write experientially, I think. And so when I first began writing that way back in the 90s, the editor at the time said, you know, like my English professor, write what you know. You know, I don't need politics in my paper. I don't need this. Write about, I don't have anything. What's going on in the farm fields? So I really took him to mean it. And so sometimes my article is purely about a breakdown in the middle of the field. It has nothing to do with anything other than, you know, fixing a piece of equipment. I try and keep, you know, farming real for people to see. Sometimes I diverge, but I try and base it in what I'm experiencing as a farmer. It might be financial, it might be, you know, environmental. But I think it's a really good, I think farming is an interesting perspective. You stand in the middle and sort of watch everything that's going around you, and you get to see a lot, everything from insect life to, you know, hedge funds.
And you're, I mean, you're literally involved with the earth. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a very grounding experience, I think.
The punning doesn't stop, but yes.
No interest, I mean, you're a lifelong farmer.
Yeah, yeah. I can't see anything that would stop me from wanting this. Even the worst days. I do think, though, we have been blessed here on the east end of Long Island because Suffolk County got out in front. So, for example, if some of our, as I think it's John Halsey at the Land Trust says, tools in the toolbox for preservation. So Suffolk County has its own, you know, purchase of development rights, and then the 5 East End towns with their 2% transfer. That was able to alleviate some of the pressure we had for the valuation of our land going through the generations. That without those, it would have been we would have had to leave. Yeah.
Good people doing good things.
Yeah.
The Foster family, salt of the earth, and so important to the history and the current situation and the future of Suffolk County. Thank you very much for watching Environment Long Island. I'm Carl Grossman.